It is March now, and the first of this month started with huge news in the WNBA involving the New York Liberty. I'm Gigi Spear. I'm here with Miles Grossman. We were both WFUV's beat reporters for the New York Liberty this past season. And a couple days ago, Sports Illustrated came out with a groundbreaking article about the WNBA, and it might have devastating implications for the Liberty. First off, Miles, how are you today?
So good. It's been a minute since we've talked about the New York Liberty. Happy to be here.
Okay, good. I'm happy to be here too. It's been so long, and they've been in the offseason for a while. The Liberty ended up making the playoffs and got eliminated in the first round, but they had a great run. We both got passionate about the team. We got to see them develop. And we also saw a little bit storylines coming out in the fall. And what just came out a couple days ago was an extension of those storylines. So on March 1st, Howard Megdal of Sports Illustrated wrote an article about the WNBA and them fining the New York Liberty $500,000. The title of the article is How Airplanes Became the WNBA's Biggest Scandal. And they said, the Liberty's repeated chartering of flights, a violation of CBA rules, collective bargaining agreement, is a window into the state of ownership into the league. And it definitely is a window into the state of the ownership of the league. For us, with the New York Liberty, we have the Tsai as owners, and they wanted to fly the New York Liberty as on chartered flights. So most of the team would just fly commercial before the Tsai stepped in, and most of the league would fly commercial too. But the Tsai found a way to be able to charter all flights, not only for their New York Liberty, but for the entire league. So Miles, what did you learn about the state of ownership in the league from this article?
Right off the bat, I was kind of surprised. I mean, it's funny with the WNBA, we always talk about the disparity with salaries, how we might have an entire WNBA roster add up to a fraction of an NBA star's contract, but no one ever really talks about the disparity in travel. Because we're so used to NBA players, obviously, to take chartered flights, even high-level Power 5 college team. It's completely normal for them to take a chartered flight everywhere they go. Even teams like Davidson within the A10, I know they take chartered flights most everywhere they go as a powerful mid-major team. And even for Fordham, exactly. Fordham women's basketball even gets a couple chartered flights every season. So it's almost surprising that the WNBA hasn't caught up and normalized chartered flights for many years. It's something that I haven't put much thought into. But you would really just assume that they would be caught up by now and have chartered flights as part of the normal travel process. And it's also an interesting point that in the WNBA, you don't have these multi-billionaire owners in all cases the way you do in the NBA. So in the case of the New York Liberty, they have very wealthy owners. They're worth $9 billion. For them to charter flights is nothing new to them. But it obviously would be for teams like the Indiana Fever, the equivalent of poorer WNBA teams. They don't really have the opportunity to do this. So it's interesting to see, even in leagues like the WNBA, you have rich teams, you have mid-tier teams, and you really do have your poorer teams who would never have the opportunity to charter flights.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so crazy, the disparities, like you said, in between the league and between teams in the WNBA and teams in the NBA. It's actually so crazy. And I think that a lot of what came up that I thought about when reading this article was the growth of the WNBA. Like last season was the 25th anniversary silver season is what they called it. And at the beginning, 25 years ago, there was 8 teams. Most of them were owned by the NBA, and so much has changed since then. And in 2003, they added free agency, which was huge for players, but they also changed from a single entity league, which was being owned by the NBA, and outside or independent ownership was allowed. So that created huge momentum for sponsorship. And a problem that the article brought up that talks about things on a bigger scale for women's sports is less than 1% of all corporate dollars for sports sponsorships go to women's sports. So the WNBA is just not getting the same amount of sponsorship as the NBA. And yeah, of course, there's no women's football or like women's MLB equivalent, but that's a big, big disparity in sponsorship that I think is just huge. And something that it also talked about is how the Players Association, the new commissioner, also wants to push the league over the top. So this is Pam Wheeler, the Players Association founding director, said that they want the growth. And obviously the new commissioner too wants the league to bring in more revenue, and a lot has changed. Kathy Engelbert was hired in 2019 as the commissioner, and she has business background. She wanted to push the league to make more money. So just some logistical facts: the CBA came together in January of 2020 to create a deal that would be in place till 2027, which increased the maximum salary from 119,000 to 215,000. Salary caps went up 30%. And Engelbert wanted a multifaceted strategy to drive in new fans, more ticket sales, more viewership, and drive the value of the franchise and assets up so that they could sell the league successfully. So, I mean, Miles, to me, I feel like chartering flights is definitely a way for the franchise to drive the quality of the game up and to drive players' experience up.
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, you would almost expect the WNBA to have caught up to this a long time ago, and it goes to show how young the WNBA really is. Because, you know, like you said, 25 years ago, there was none of this, and you never really think of the WNBA as such a young league. So I think that the WNBA, you know, maybe to put more of a positive spin on this controversy, I think will probably push the WNBA to getting these chartered like the sponsorships with airlines that will get them chartered flights consistently throughout the league. I don't think that the Liberty did the WNBA really a disservice. I think any controversy surrounding this now, they'll be like, wow, it's creating more of a discussion around it about why do WNBA players fly commercially. When you really think about it, it'd be kind of hilarious to be sitting in the airport and turn to, like, that's Sabrina Ionescu. Like that's wild. You wouldn't expect to see WNBA players in the airport. And yeah, so it is pretty spectacular to see. But I do think the WNBA is headed in the right direction with this controversy, and the New York Liberty happened to be part of the kickstarting of the future of the WNBA.
Yes, and like I don't know about you, but like I'm not surprised it's the New York Liberty. When I would go to games, it was such a nice experience every single time. It was
Mhm.
so professional, and like honestly, I mean, maybe it's just because like I really want more growth in WNBA in general, and I wanted that even before I got to go to games. But being there, the product sells itself. The game is exciting. Like the players
Yeah.
are so good at what they do. They're a great team. The old coach Walt Hopkins is good, but now you have a new coach in Sandy Brondello, which has just amazing playing and coaching
Mhm.
experience. So yeah, I think the New York Liberty as themselves in the New York spotlight too, playing at Barclays Center with the Nets. I think that they're the perfect people to do this. And if the Tsais have enough money to charter the team and maybe charter some other teams like they were trying to push for in September, $500,000, I guess, is pretty okay for them. But I just think it's a bad look that a team is being charged because they want their players to have a better experience. I think that's a really hard part to deal with.
It is. It's a bad look for the WNBA. It makes them look like they're punishing, teams who are trying to push forward the future of the WNBA. But at the same time, it does sort of make sense to me because, in WNBA Twitter, there was a lot of backlash saying, like, why are they getting fined? They don't deserve to be fined. There's no competitive advantage caused. And I thought that was kind of a silly argument because, I mean, I feel like there's absolutely a competitive advantage caused by flying private, just the comfort, the privacy, the ability to kind of be in your own headspace while you travel and not have to worry about those things that I know exactly what they like to deal with the commercial flights for road trips and things like that. And it's obviously a lot more comfortable and a lot better for your players to get to fly private. So I was a little surprised to see the WNBA fans act a little naive on Twitter and say it's not a competitive advantage, because it surely is. But even with that competitive advantage, as both you and I know, in that second half of the season, Liberty were not really winning many road games, and obviously I wasn't aware at the time that they were chartering these flights and had any sort of competitive advantage over any other road WNBA team, but it wasn't enough of an advantage to turn the tide for the Liberty. And it kind of goes to show that they really were a bottom tier team in the WNBA who scratched their way into the playoffs, but still, even with these road advantages, I mean, when we would go to games in Barclays, I know it was a wonderful experience, but they weren't really winning games. We'd even at home without, any competitive advantage on the road. So I don't know. It's kind of sad to see kind of furthers how poorly we look, how poorly the Liberty were in the WNBA.
Yeah. You know what's
But
interesting too is that they chartered flights for that one portion of the season and then just didn't when they actually made the playoffs. And I think that was like the ownership's way of kind of making the commissioner and the board of governors a little bit happier. It's like, all right, if we win in this playoff matchup,
yeah,
the team that's like ranked way better than us, they were the 8th seed, they barely made it.
yeah,
And it's because we chartered a flight. All right, that would be a bad look. But up until then, like they pointed out in the article, Dee Richards, one of her highlights of the season was going to Napa. And like they were able to go to Napa because they had extra time because they chartered a flight. And I feel like there's so many advantages to it. I get what the WNBA fans on Twitter were saying though, like, all right, it's maybe not that much of an advantage, like your talent has to speak for itself, but they're professional athletes. And I think especially in women's sports, to be treated like a professional athlete and to feel like that and to be able to put your all into something and stand like very proud while you do it is an amazing thing. And two, like we've seen is they have crazy schedules. Like to be on the road and play at home and then be on the road again all in 1 week is a lot. And they're tall people. Like those are just 3 reasons that chartered flights, in my opinion, I think are so beneficial. And we saw that argument, like the New York Liberty's flight got delayed one time and some of the players went on live on Instagram and talked about it and was like, man, we might not miss our game, but like we're going to miss the ability to practice or to get
yeah.
comfortable and get acclimated. There's so many advantages to chartering.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's funny that you mentioned that Dee Richards and the Napa trip, because the Napa trip, those things in the NBA, right? We mentioned those, like that'd be celebrated as such a nice team bonding experience in the NBA. Nothing could possibly be controversial about a Napa trip in the NBA. And of course, with the WNBA, how none of that is normalized, it's pretty spectacular, because obviously a Napa trip should be a wonderful team bonding experience that all WNBA teams should have to do. And it's a little surprising that they were this harsh with the sanctions, obviously threatening to terminate. I don't know how serious that really was, but it is surprising that they were this harsh with the fines and the penalties, when at the end of the day, like, these aren't that they're not that monumental of rule breaks by the New York Liberty. But like you mentioned, it is, you're finding these billionaires, and when you have 9 billion, I don't know what 500,000 really does to you. So you can't be that hung up on the figures, I guess.
Yeah, I feel the same. Like I know we talked about this a little bit before, but just to mention, to talk about the size wealth, when Sandy Brondella was announced as new head coach, there was a press conference, and in the press conference, I'm like, Clara Tsai is talking, and it was pretty in and out, and I was trying to see why, and it was because she was on a private jet. Like she was doing the Zoom from her own jet, so they had the money to spare, and other owners do too. Like in Las Vegas, Davis and Bill Hornbuckle bought the Las Vegas Aces together, and he in particular, Davis, wants to pay players more, but with the salary caps, he can't. But they didn't say anything about paying coaches more. And I feel like that is a huge thing. So Becky Hammon comes in, she gets the $1 million contract.
Mhm.
And some players, some of WNBA Twitter was upset about this and was like, man, this is a little weird. Is it because she came from the NBA? Is it because she's a coach? And like, what does that say
Mhm.
about paying your coach so much more than players?
Yeah.
But really, it's like he wants to be able to break the mold and be like, players should sign $1 million contracts way more often. And also coaches should want to come to the WNBA. And I feel like about like rising the product that much is so nice. And I think there's such a difference between this new philosophy, the Tsai, the Davises in Las Vegas, and other new
Mhm.
owners throughout the league that want to push this and want to invest and have the revenue or I
Yeah.
mean income to invest into their team, and the old mindset of not really making a profit off the team, kind of just having it to have it. Um, I think that that is a huge shift, and I really would love to see more of that new mindset coming in. You have people who have money and want to spend it. Okay, let them spend it. I don't think that there should be anything wrong with that. This has been amazing. Thank you all for listening. For Miles Grossman, I'm Gigi Spear, and this is a production of WFUV Sports.